Hello, everybody. Thank you and welcome to the Texas School Policy Network legislative update here on April the 28th. It's been a busy session so far and lots here to happen shortly, just the next 6 weeks or so of the rest of the session. If you would, just keep yourself muted if you're not talking, and we have the chat available for any questions that you have. I'm Catherine Knepp with Moat Casey and Associates, and my friends here from Moat Casey, Terry Fauché, Monica Zoyeski, and Josh Haney are all here this afternoon, here to help us navigate through all of the different things that are happening in the Texas legislature. Today we're just going to be having a bit of discussion about what's currently occurring in both the House and the Senate and how they're working together, especially when it comes to the budget. And we are going to be recording this session, and we'll be able to produce that recording for you a little bit later today or tomorrow. And we'll also share with you any slide information that we see here today. And as always, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to go ahead and move forward and talk about where we are in the 87th legislative session. So you'll notice that in just, about 10, 11 days or so, 12 days, we've got the last day for the House committees to report bills. So you may have noticed yesterday and today with the House Public Education hearing, they've started to post Senate bills because they're gonna have to start working through those bills in order for those to make it through the process. And then the Senate, since they're a little smaller, they get a little extra time, not as many pieces of the puzzle, if you will. And so they have until May 20th to pass their bills for receipt in the House. And so we're coming closer and closer to the end of the session. It's kind of hard to believe that it's only about a month away. So a lot is going to happen here in the next few weeks. So keep your eyes peeled. And just in terms of the highlights of the last week, as always, there have been a number of things that have occurred each week this session. And so last Thursday was the House's budget day. It was an all-day affair of almost 11 hours, 12 hours of budget discussions. They worked very well with each other, not a lot of hot contention on the floor, but we'll be going through a lot of what they talked about and a lot of the amendments that they adopted. And so they passed their version of Senate Bill 1. And then on Monday, as is the usual process, the Senate named their conferees because, of course, the House and the Senate have to hash out their differences between their two versions of the budget bill. Of course, they don't agree on everything, as we well know. And so they get to produce specific members of their chamber to go into deliberations with House members. And so on Tuesday, the House returned in kind, and they named their conferees for the particular for the budget conference. And then on Wednesday today, the House here's Senate Bill 28. They had a House Public Education hearing yesterday, and so they had a procedural error that forced them to hear several of their bills today. And then tomorrow, of course, the budget conference sessions begin. You'll note that there was a posting for the budget conferee session tomorrow. And so they'll begin talks tomorrow, but much of that business will happen behind closed doors. So just the first and the last session will occur together in front of the public. And so now I'm just going to turn it over to our academic and accountability folks for them to go through what's going on with academics and accountability in the 87th legislature.
Thanks, Catherine. We wanted to go ahead and update you on things that are kind of moving through the process. Some of the bills that we think might have a chance of making it all the way to the end. So the first one we wanted to mention was the one that Chairman Dutton has filed in several sessions where he wants to disaggregate by gender, not only by racial group, in the Closing the Gaps domain. You'll notice that that was voted out of the House committee. There's also a companion bill in the Senate by Senator Miles that was heard in the Senate committee. So this bill may get a little bit more airtime than it has in the past. House Bill 773 by Representative Van Dever has passed from the House. That would add the completion of a CTE program of study to CCMR indicators. You'll note that this year in the 2021 accountability system, CTE is no longer part of it. This particular bill would add it back, and it would add it back as a full point. House Bill 1603 by Representative Huberty and the companion bill, Senate Bill 177, would make individual graduation committees permanent. It's something that a lot of people have wanted. So it would remove that expiration date from statute. The House version has already passed from the House, so it looks like that is making its way through rather rapidly. And then something that's a little bit related to that is House Bill 999 by Representative Bernal. And that's really only to address sort of the things that have happened during COVID. So for the next 2 years, it would allow districts to convene an IGC or an individual graduation committee for any student in grade 12, regardless of whether or not they've passed the minimum number of STAR exams. You'll notice that is passed from the House. And so that would be something that would also be very good as a tool for helping some of those seniors who have been affected by COVID. Some other things that are just kind of making their way through. We've talked a little bit about a lot of changes that people are interested in making to the social studies curriculum. 2 bills that have passed have made their way through quite a number of hoops already. Senate Bill 1063 would modify the foundation school high school program to require 1/2 credit in economics or personal financial literacy and economics. So that 1/2 credit that we've always had that's been devoted to economics, well, you would also be able to take a class where 2/3 of it would be in personal financial literacy and only 1/3 of it would be in economics. Another one is House Bill 129 would add digital citizenship to the 6th grade social studies curriculum. And that also has passed from the first chamber. We have probably talked a lot, you've heard a lot about remote learning. And so you'll notice that several of these are making their way through the process. House Bill 1468 is now passing to its 3rd reading in the House, which means it will likely go on to the Senate. The big bill from Chairman Taylor, Senate Bill 27, is now set on the Senate calendar. And also there is one other bill, Senate Bill 226 by Senator Paxton, where she wants to add virtual education training for all teacher prep programs. That's also passed from the Senate, and it's made its way to the House. And then COVID relief bills, there was that House Bill 144 that has to do with a lot of red tape and extra documentation that they would require to make sure that we know how students receiving special education services, how they fared during this entire disruption, and whether or not their needs were being met during the disruption, and how they're going to address those. You'll notice that the companion bill, Senate Bill 89, is actually passed from the Senate.
All right, thanks, Terry. So moving on to some assessment and accountability related bills. And again, some of these bills may be ones that you recall us speaking about previously, but we wanted to continue to keep you all updated on which bills, as Terry mentioned, are kind of gaining traction and moving. So these two, House Bill 3270 by Representative Dutton and Senate Bill 1365, they're different bills. They are not identical or companion bills, but they both have similar effects in expanding state sanction and intervention powers. It seems that both of them are targeting the Houston ISD takeover and kind of closing the loopholes from those different lawsuits that prevented state takeover. And so Dutton's bill has been voted favorably on the House side, from the House Public Education Committee. And then on the Senate side, Betancourt's bill has also been voted from committee and set on the Senate intent calendar. So both of those bills are moving. House Bill 3346 and House Bill 1302, these next two here, both have been voted favorably from committee, and they add, Representative Mesa's bill adds an additional accountability indicator for successful completion of advanced coursework in middle and junior high school. And Rep. Julian's bill here would add additional indicators to CCMR, specifically around students who earn a diploma after not more than 3.5 years of high school attendance. And it would also allow 6th or 7th or 8th grade students who are completing a pre-AP or pre-IB course, and some other students that are kind of completing advanced coursework to receive credit for that. House Bill 3731, we spent quite a bit of time discussing this bill last time. This is the one about kind of redefining the D in the accountability system as unacceptable. That bill, as substituted, has been voted favorably from committee as well. A couple more to note here. Another bill that we kind of spent some time on last time, House Bill 3261 by Representative Huberty and Senate Bill 1171. This bill is the one that would greenlight implementation of House Bill 3906 that was passed last session, specifically targeting that transition to online assessments. The committee substitute was voted favorably from the House, and that substitute pushed the timeline of implementation or of that transition to 2023-2024. House Bill 2344 by Representatives Wiener was also voted favorably from House Pub Ed last week. And this bill would add a writing portfolio option to the non-multiple choice item types for STAR exams as required by HB 3906. And then there were a number of bills, 3 specifically that have been voted favorably from committee that all kind of target eliminating the use of certain state assessments not required by the USDE. So there are 3 that are kind of on the move. So we will continue to keep you all updated on those. And then 3 others of note, House Bill 220 by Representative Bernal. This one would add that additional academic resource campus option under 1882 for turnaround campuses. That one was voted favorably from committee. These next 2, I know our finance team will talk briefly about them, House Bill 4545 and 4465. We spent some time on them last time. They're both a vehicle for stimulus funds, as well as having 4545 specifically has some pretty considerable implications for school districts if passed, specifically around any students who fail STAR reading or math in grades 3, 5, and 8. And those, all of these bills have been voted favorably from the House Public Education Committee. And I'll turn it over.
One last bill that we wanted to talk to you about was House Bill 3557. You'll notice that that one seems to be moving pretty well. There's a companion bill, Senate Bill 1697 over in the Senate. And people are kind of terming this the Texas Red Shirt bill because of the fact that it is looking at giving kids sort of an extra year to play, so to speak. If a child was not enrolled in kindergarten or pre-K this year, and a parent wants to go ahead and enroll them in those grades, even though they would technically be kind of aged out for that, they could actually go in and register them for pre-K or K, whichever one they were eligible for this year. And in grades K through 8, if the student was enrolled last year, if the parent determines that they feel like the student needs to be retained in a particular grade, then the parent would ultimately have the option of retaining the student. Similarly, if it's an end of course exam, an end of a high school course, then the students would be able to be retained in that course if the parent or guardian decided that that was in the best interest of their child. The school would have to set up a retention committee for all of these. If a parent requests to retain their student, and they have to abide ultimately by the parent's decision, even if the retention committee were to recommend that the student move on.
Thanks so much, Terry and Monica, for all that insight. I know it's really helpful, especially during this time of year when everybody's thinking about STAR, to be thinking about what's going to happen next in terms of student testing and academics and accountability. So now we're going to turn to the budget. As I mentioned in the beginning, the House entertained the budget on Thursday, and there were quite a few things that they discussed during that long 11-hour marathon session where they snacked on Round Rock donuts and Wingstop and all the other things that the House members like to bring to consume on the floor while they're working. So it's definitely a project for them, and they've got another project ahead of them, and this is the final budget as considered by the conferees from both sides. So like I said before, they have to hash out this budget, and there are a handful of members from the House and a handful of members from the Senate that are the conferees, that are the participants of this conference committee, and they are the ones who get to argue on behalf of your school districts for what goes ultimately into the bill, what is funded. So one of the big pieces of this, of course, is how the ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds will fit into the budget. And so we're definitely curious what the conferees' individual positions are about funding for schools. Are they open to letting schools manage the money on their own, like many other states have done with their budgets? Or are they interested in tying particular stipulations to how the funds are used? Or are they going to try to be even more creative and supplant some portion of the funds? And so we're going to talk through just a little bit today who those conferees are, the things they've said in the past. We don't have a magic 8-ball. We can't know exactly what they're going to say, but we can make some conjectures about it. And certainly if you have one of these conferees as your representative or your senator, it wouldn't be a bad idea to contact their office in the coming days with your particular opinions and your plans for what these ESSER funds will be used for, because we certainly have noticed people advocating for that as part of the program to try to get these funds to schools directly. So I'm going to talk a little bit about who these conferees are. So you'll notice on your screen the list of House conferees and the list of Senate conferees. So we have Dr. Greg Bonin from Friendswood, Republican, the chair of the Appropriations Committee. And then we've got Giovanni Caprileone, Mary Gonzalez, Armando Wally, and Terry Wilson. And a number of these representatives have roles to play on the Appropriations Committee. Representative Wilson is the head of the Appropriations Committee, the subcommittee rather, for public education. Mary Gonzalez is the vice chair of the Appropriations Committee as a whole, and Representative Wally serves as a chair on several other subcommittees for different articles that don't involve education. We certainly know that Representative Gonzalez is on the House Public Education Committee. She's certainly very pro-public ed and certainly wants to make sure that these dollars, at least from all of her actions and discussions, seems like she would be interested in seeing these dollars go directly to schools. We've seen Dr. Greg Bonin introduce a bill called House Bill 2021. This particular bill, which was heard by the Appropriations Committee, it was presented as a method for deciding how these federal funds could be spent after the end of the legislative session. So maybe some assumption on the author's part that the dollars wouldn't be, the decision about the dollars would not be made until after the end of the session. Now, some of the action from the House as a whole maybe changed his mind a little bit about that, but just it's important to note that he did have a bill that had some intention behind how these federal dollars would be allocated. And then on the Senate conferee side, we see all Republicans on the Senate set of conferees, and certainly Senator Jane Nelson is the chair of the Senate Finance Committee. And then we have several other members that we are familiar with. Of course, Senator Larry Taylor, who of course is the chair of the Senate Education Committee, which is certainly encouraging in some respects for schools because he knows the needs of schools. He's been hearing about it. He's been championing funding for additional virtual education options and things like that. But we'll remember from the discussion from this fall and in the early spring when we're talking about the hold harmless, certainly can't make absolute connections between how these particular members and senators decide about things based upon how they treated the hold harmless in that discussion, but there might be some similarities in the ways that they would react to federal fund usage. So for example, if you recall, Senator Huffman in some Senate finance hearings talked about her hesitancy to apply a hold harmless without strings attached. She asked questions about, well, are we going to be double funding kids because we want to know where these kids are? And Senator Taylor had similar comments about making sure that we account for all these students, encourage them to come back to the classroom. We don't want to just simply fund school districts based upon their needs right now, and then maybe they just sort of stop trying to get kids coming into the door. So certainly not maybe as favorable as we would like from the Senate side, but certainly there's some school champions, especially with Senator Taylor on that side. And then in terms of just what else can we know about some of the additional legislation that these particular representatives and senators have put forth? What do we know based upon their actions as well as other people's actions in the Senate and the House about kind of which way they'll lean? And one of the other things to think about is the discussion that Commissioner Morath had with Senator Paul Bettencourt during one of the first Senate education meetings. And certainly Commissioner Morath was having a friendly dialogue there. And part of the discussion that they shared was that there may be some creative strategies that the legislature could pursue to prolong the impact of federal funds. And they even said something like put some in the bank. Now, there are certain limitations in ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 themselves that would limit their ability to do things like that. But it does definitely speak to some of their intention. So now the House, it's a little bit clearer what their intentions are for these federal dollars based upon some of the amendments that they put forth and adopted last Thursday. And so one of the things that we do need to review are what some of those amendments are. And so first of all, this particular page, this speaks first of all, maybe not necessarily to the ESSER funds directly, but Representative Slayton offered an amendment which defunds the governor's fund, which is a pot of money. And then in that, within that amendment, there was an amendment to that amendment, Amendment 27. And this particular amendment requires that that money that was freed up would move to be used for property tax compression purposes. So it's unclear how much compression would result from that particular movement. Of course, these particular amendments were part of the House's version of Senate Bill 1, so we don't know whether this would apply in the final budget, but if that's the case, that's something to watch. Just wanted to make note of that before we moved on to some of these other amendments that have more to do with the federal funding.
And just to add to that, Catherine.
Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
The fund is just, if y'all were curious, it's a Texas Enterprise Fund, and it's a fund that the governor uses for economic development purposes, and it essentially just zeroes that out. It had previously gotten an appropriation of 100 million. His amendment just zeroes that out, and like Catherine mentioned, just in sort of his amendment to that dedicates it towards compression. And so, I'm sure that Representative Slayton is having a conversation with staff over at the governor's office right now about that. So we'll see how that sticks. But that was sort of a surprise, I think, to a lot of us that are kind of watching these discussions. And so we'll just kind of have to see how that all shakes out in the conference committee process that Catherine laid out for you.
Yeah, and certainly interested to see what the Senate does with this, because certainly they like to take a lot of credit for property tax compression and that sort of phenomenon. So here are some of the amendments. It became kind of a show last Thursday afternoon of who could kind of one up each other on the floor in terms of providing an amendment that would make a stand on federal dollars and their use within the House's version of the budget. So while this is not exhaustive in terms of all the discussion and statements and amendments that were made, here are some of the more notable ones you might have seen in our newsletter on Friday morning. So first of all, Representative Eddie Rodriguez's Amendment 73, there were over 200 amendments, says that the state must distribute federal funds to school districts and charter schools in a timely manner as written in federal guidance. This really was meant to strengthen the rider that Representative Morrison had put within the language of the appropriations bill already. He also explained that the amendment, its intention is to ensure that federal funding would be supplemental and not supplant state dollars, and that was adopted. So the entire chamber had the option to vote for that, and they did, and they approved it. And then the House voted to ban school vouchers, so maybe not directly related to federal funding, but certainly staked an interest in what they want the budget dollars to be used for. The House overwhelmingly voted 115 to 29 to adopt Amendment 84 by Representative Herrera, which prohibits state dollars from funding private school choice programs. And Chairman Huberty, or former Chairman Huberty, even made remarks about all of the different choices that are available to schools currently within the public school system. And so you might notice if you keep count of these vote counts from past legislative sessions, this 29 number seems to be going down. It used to be in the 40s. So you might look up and see whether your representative is part of that 29 or not. And then again, just to sort of add on, Representative Howard's Amendment 134 requires that the Appropriations Committee and Senate Finance Committees be able to conduct public hearings regarding federal funding allocation. She is part of the Appropriations Committee, and a few weeks back, as part of the discussion on House Bill 2021, which is Chair Dr. Chair Bonin, his bill, there was this back and forth with them about, well, isn't our job as the legislature to, control the purse, and what good is creating a sort of subcommittee that meets outside of the legislature itself to make major funding decisions? This is not small peanuts. And so this particular amendment she put forth, the entire House again had the opportunity to say something about it by voting for it, and it got adopted. And so, like I mentioned before, this seems to be a little bit of a reversal on the House's side, and maybe casting aside Dr. Bonin's efforts to create this mini LBB-like committee. So definitely part of the priorities of the House to make sure that these hearings occur and that this doesn't occur within a small body behind closed doors, these kinds of decisions on the federal funds. And so then, just to add to that, Representative Morrison then had an amendment 136, and this requires the legislature to meet in person, like in a regular or special session, to consider how this recent federal stimulus funding would be spent. So, not only do we want these Appropriations Committee and the Senate Finance Committee to conduct hearings, we actually want the entire legislature to come on back, because this is enough money and important enough that the entire body needs to be there to make these decisions and have this debate. So that certainly seems to be the interest of the House, because I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, colleagues, but I believe this was adopted unanimously by the House. And then the last piece of the puzzle regarding this plan for federal dollars is together, Representative Huberty and Chairman Dutton adopted or put forth these amendments that were adopted, Amendment 137 and Amendment 138. And these two amendments work together. The 138 was the amendment on 137, and they require districts and charter schools to author plans regarding how they will spend ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 dollars. And LEAs will have to post these plans on their websites. and then report, next May to the legislature how they spent this money. So, many of you have already started thinking about these plans in terms of how much money you're going to see and what you intend to do with it. In previous presentations, we've talked about maintenance of effort and maintenance of equity provisions that you at the district level would be required to uphold. So, while you're thinking about your budget, provide some time to create sort of what if scenarios of, if we got this money, what would we do with it? And maybe even right now, go ahead and share that with your representatives and with your senators. Just go ahead and get a head start on those types of plan making. Certainly it will help you spend the dollars well and communicate well to the legislature about how big and important of an impact these dollars would make on the lives of your students. And so now I'm going to go through just a few bills outside of these amendments, of course, that make some claims on this ESSER funding, on ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. So just to give a complete picture of the conversation, or at least a little bit more of a complete picture of what's happening within the halls of the legislature in terms of this discussion. So Senate Bill 2023, this was actually heard in the Senate committee, Education Committee hearing yesterday. And this is Senator Powell's bill, and this attempts to kind of fill in the gaps of a teacher shortage as well as address learning loss. And so this would create a Texas Tutor Corps, and money would be used from the federal funding pots to fund this program. So, specific items tagged to this money as opposed to sending it to you to be spent on whatever you'd like. So just heard within that committee yesterday, so it hasn't seen a lot of movement, but certainly, like I mentioned before, maybe indicates some interest on the Senate's part to have some strings attached to the funding. And then, of course, the two Dutton bills, House Bill 4545 and House Bill 4465. These two also lay claim to some of the funding. So House Bill 4545 creates the Strong Foundations Grant Program for elementary schools and includes provisions of outcomes-based funding, like we saw in some of the discussions and debate in House Bill 3 last session. And then House Bill 4465, it sounds a lot actually like amendment that was adopted as part of the budget discussion last Thursday. Again, that requires districts to develop an annual plan to use stimulus dollars and to submit that plan to TEA. So, having some sort of accountability for how you're using that money. And then just wanted to move on then from the particular budget bill. I don't know if anybody has any specific questions about that so far, but certainly feel free to drop that in the chat. I see that our accountability team has dropped their particular emails. If you have questions about accountability and academics related stuff, go ahead and send that on to them. But I'm not seeing any questions right now, so I'll just keep moving. But here are some things that sort of, in some ways, good news that they're not moving. We usually like to talk about bills that we like to see move and get through the process, but sometimes no news is good news. And so voucher bills like Senate Bill 1698 and the combo of Senate Bill 1968 and House Bill 4537, those have not received a hearing yet. These are the ones that fund tax credit programs and educational savings account type programs for students that are not enrolled in public schools. And then the school lobbying bills of House Bill 749 and House Bill 3687 are still pending in committee. You'll remember that House Bill 749 is the one that puts an outright ban on any kind of lobbying that public schools and charter schools would pay for. So you couldn't hire somebody from, a lobbying entity or or have membership in TASA or your board members in TASB, for example, in order to advocate on your behalf. So you would have to make the trek back and forth to the Capitol or hire an additional employee to do that for you. So good news that those are stalled where they are. Remember, May 10th is when they would have to be reported out of the House. And then, of course, with House Bill 3 cleanup, I'm going to just in a minute have my colleague Josh Haney give you a little bit more of a full rundown. He's been studying the changes that are occurring on the House's plan. And of course, that House plan has been voted out of the House. It's now in the Senate awaiting discussion on the floor. So if there's particular provisions of the committee substitute of House Bill 1525, especially as amended, that you like or you dislike, it might be time to call your senators, because they'll be having discussion here soon on the floor about that particular bill. The companion bill authored by Chairman Taylor is in House Pub Ed. Got voted through the Senate. If you'll recall, this is the same language as the as filed version of House Bill 1525, and is not received a hearing yet. So you might imagine that House Bill 1525 in the Senate may make it through a little bit faster, but you know, we still got a ways to go. And there are significant differences in the CTE and fast growth sections of the House bill, of course, from each iteration as it made its way through the House, as well as between it and the Senate bill itself. So I'm going to turn it over to Josh. He wants to talk through a little bit about what the CTE bill looks like. He's been running some numbers for district by district benefits to see how you might have benefited had this been law in 2019-20.
Thanks, Catherine. And I think I need permission to share my screen.
Oh, sure.
Or perhaps if you stop sharing. There we go. Okay. All right. So like Catherine mentioned, we've been sort of running the numbers on 1525, and we do expect to have a more complete model ready in the coming days here shortly for y'all. But in the meantime, we have modeled the CTE portion of the bill. And if y'all will recall from previous presentations, the total bill is estimated to cost around $330 million. The CTE portion is the lion's share of that, a little bit more than $200 million for the biennium. And so that's really where districts will see the bulk of any funding changes out of 1525 as it was passed by the House. And so because of that, we started there with the CTE changes. And again, like I mentioned, a fuller model of all of the provisions of 1525 is coming. That's at the top of our to-do list, and we'll share that out when it's ready. Excuse me.
Might zoom in just a little bit on your screen, Josh. My glasses aren't powerful enough to read that.
There we go. Is that better?
There we go.
Okay. So we put together this document. It kind of outlines the changes in 1525. Of course, in the House, they amended some of the weights. And so this document reflects that. I'm not going to go over all this now, but we do have runs for each district. And I just wanted to sort of share with y'all conceptually what we did. And so that way, if you guys have questions, you guys can go and check your data and you know, feel free to reach out if there are any, if you do see any discrepancies. But essentially our approach with this run is we modeled based on 1920, and that's because the 1920 data is largely settled, right? The 2021 data, there's going to be such varying impacts due to the hold harmless, and you know, y'all just attendance is jumping around so much. And so you know, we decided to focus on 1920 because that was again, the dust had kind of settled on that. And so you'll see here the comparison and the comparisons between your 1920 CTE allotment and this should be as of your most current run on summary of finance. And then this column here is just as if 1525 was in place in 1920. And again, y'all will recall that 1525 does two main things. It changes the weights, right? The current weight for CT is 1.35. This bill establishes a tiered system. And I'm seeing a question, will we email it out? And I will drop in the chat right now the link to these estimates, and we will email it out when we email out the notes from this webinar. So here's the PDF. So I know y'all are going to go open this up and not listen to me anymore, but here's, I'll continue on my spiel here. And so this column here is the 1920 CTE allotment if House Bill 1525 was in effect. And the way we did this is we got data from TEA. Okay, what portion of CTE FTEs are in those various tiers, right? And so this tier, the 1.28 weight, are the portion of your CTE FTEs that come from level 1 and level 2 courses. And if you don't know what that means, that this link here can show you how TEA, it's really from, they developed those levels for purposes of the Perkins grant. They're using those same level designations for this weighting system with the new bill. So the 1.28 is again the level 1 and level 2 CTE courses. The higher 1.47 weight is level 3 and level 4, so the more advanced CTE courses. And then the 1.1 weight is if it's a course that's not in an approved program of study. And again, that program of study approval designation is part of the Perkins grant process, and that link I showed you up above can help you determine what courses are approved and are not approved. We have received sort of confirmation from TEA and others that the intention of this bill is also to include regionally approved programs of study in your programs of study under the bill. And so essentially, if you have a regionally approved program, it's not going to show up in the 1.1 weight, right? It is regionally approved, so it would you'd be able to access the higher weights for CTE FTEs coming from those regionally approved programs of study. And so just to wrap this up here, essentially this row for each district should equal 100%, right? So we took all the 1920 CTE FTEs, divvied them out according to the data that TEA had on file. So for example, Abbott ISD, TEA told us that 59.3% of their total CTE FTEs came from level 1 and level 2 courses in approved programs of study, right? And so that is what's driving some of the differences for this district. Also, of course, the 1525 changes the weights, but it also adds the small and mid-size adjustment. It adds the small and mid-size adjustment to the CTE allotment, right? So if you are less than 5,000 ADA, you will see an adjusted basic allotment that's used in the CTE allotment, right? So instead of 6160, you're going to have a higher basic allotment multiplier that's used for purposes of the CTE allotment. And so a smaller district like Abbott, right, they're getting a boost for the small and mid-size adjustment, and then they have a relatively a higher portion of CTE FTEs that are coming from that higher weight. And so they're getting the benefit here because of the higher weight as well. So you'll see some, you can see the differences. Generally speaking, sort of winners under this are going to be smaller districts, right? So because now their basic allotment multiplier is higher than 6160. And so that sort of gives them an advantage there. And also if you have high levels of CTE FTEs coming from those level 3 and level 4 courses, right? So you can see larger districts, Abilene, Aldine, Aledo, Alief, others. Larger districts don't get that small and mid-size adjustment benefit under the bill, and if they don't have a very high rate of participation in those level 3 and level 4 courses, then this bill, those two things combined, is going to essentially result in a loss in CTE funding for those districts. And so that's generally how this is going to work. And so, and again, I just want to mention these portions here, how we divvied up the CTE FTEs, that came from TEA. If you go to your CTE director and they say, you know, this is not accurate, you know, you guys want to update with different assumptions, we do have, and I believe we shared this out before, but in case y'all wanted it again, we do have a little CTE allotment calculator, and it covers the same information from the estimate document that I shared. But this allows you to go in and sort of use your own assumptions. So you enter in your district number, you have to enter in your regular program 88. That determines whether or not you get a small and mid-size adjustment. And then you just have to enter in your CTE enrollment by course level and hour, and credit hour. And once you enter in all that, it'll tell you the difference between what current law would have yielded you and then what 1525 yields you for CTE allotment. If there are, shoot us an email. We can have another, we had that webinar for the hold harmless calculator. If enough of y'all are interested in this, shoot us an email and we can organize another webinar just focused on this. Just email us at tspn@mopecasey.com. And if there's enough interest and if you guys are sufficiently confused by this tool, hopefully it's helpful. But if you do have questions, we can set up a more detailed webinar on that, where we take examples and kind of work through the process on that. So I shared the estimates. Again, I'll drop in the chat. This first link here is for the PDF of the estimates that I walked through. This document here with sort of our runs based on TEA data. And then the calculator, if you want to go and enter this in and sort of use your own assumptions, that link is also in the chat there. And so feel free to use those tools to help you kind of determine what the impact of House Bill 1525 will be on your CTE funding. And then of course
it gets passed in this particular form.
Right. Yeah, this is the version that was passed by the House. We still got a ways to go, right? So got to make its way through the Senate, but you can at least check and see kind of what what the possible impact could be. And then yeah, if you guys have any questions or anything, feel free to reach out, and we're happy to help. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Catherine.
Yeah, thanks so much, Josh. It's really interesting to just see how these different things interact with each other as well. We'll certainly be excited to see how the whole House Bill 1525, should it pass all the way and get signed by the governor, what the ultimate impact will be, and sort of the whole package of House Bill 3 and its cleanup. So just want to verify, Josh, if you don't mind, just nod your head if you can see the screen appropriately. Now that I've good, just making sure y'all can see what I'm seeing. So again, we're eager to see how this particular bill makes its way through, as well as you all. Again, this bill shouldn't go into effect until next school year. So fortunately, we've had to deal with this hold harmless question, but I don't think this will be thrown into the mix. So, and then online learning, of course, is just a few more minutes. We're going to make sure that this particular update goes up to about an hour, but not much over it, if we even get there, just to show appreciation for you all's time. But just want to give a quick update on a batch of several batches of other bills that we've been tracking throughout the course of the spring. And so first of all, here's a batch of online learning bills. Many of you I've seen in the news have already started adopting virtual programs for next year, having conversations with your families and your students about what the options are, what you plan to offer, and certainly what your health and safety rules might be for next year, certainly whether masks are mandated or not. So here are three bills of note. House Bill 538 would remove restrictions prohibiting districts from becoming full-time Texas Virtual School Network participants or program offers. But that one seems to be kind of not moving as fast. This has been heard in committee a couple of weeks ago. The two bills, at least that I'm watching, although there may be others that people have noticed moving as well, is that Senate Bill 27. This is the Texas Virtual School Network overall bill that expands access for students in K-12 public schools. This particular bill did have language that drew concern for public schools and charter schools because it read like dollars would be flowing outside of the public school system, or at least services paid for by public school dollars outside of enrolled student participation, sort of voucher-like language, and that has been stripped from the bill. So this certainly just provides some additional flexibility within the virtual school network that isn't currently offered. And this has such a low bill number that we do anticipate that it's going to move forward. It's on the Senate floor calendar for today, so maybe making its way over to the House here pretty soon. And then House Bill 1468. This is Representative Bell's bill. This basically allows you to do what you're doing right now and letting you do this moving forward. And so this is passed a third reading in the House today. They'll consider it for one last time before potentially being passed out and sent to the Senate. So that one's really making its way. We'll see what the Senate does with it. But if you've enjoyed having that virtual programming this year in its current form, or maybe a new and improved version in the years to come, again, you might contact your senators as it makes its way over to the Senate side and tell them how you'd like to see this one make it to the governor's office. So then we've got, this has kind of crept up on the radar screen at MoCasey here pretty recently. Many of you are already talking about adopting tax rates for next year, analyzing the possibilities of what you could provide. And so Senate Bill 1428 and Senate Bills 1438 and its companion House Bill 3376. These address your ability to adopt disaster pennies. You might recall that what disaster pennies are pennies that you can adopt and you can levy in the year after a disaster has been declared by the governor within a particular area. And in this case, the disaster is COVID, which happens to cover the entire state, or at least that's one of the disasters. Of course, we had Winter Storm Uri in February as well. And so these particular bills desire is to exclude epidemics and or pandemics from the list of qualifying disasters in the tax code, and they have different effective dates. So the Senate Bill 1438 on the bottom, this one would begin sooner. This one would apply to this coming tax year. And then the Senate Bill 1428, this you'd have a year to operate under the current rules, but then the following year you'd be limited. So Senate Bill 1428 is passed a third reading in the Senate on today, and then the combo there, Senate Bill 1438 and House Bill 3376. The Senate bill was voted out of House Ways and Means, so it's a Senate bill and it's already voted out of the committee on the House side, so this one's really moving. And then the House bill is set on the House calendar, so it's moving, but maybe just not as quickly. So certainly you could adopt these pennies for Winter Storm Uri reasons or any other kind of disasters that maybe befell your particular area, where your particular county was considered a disaster area. But this would really put a limit on what you could do for COVID purposes. One thing to note as part of the tax code is that you do have to have an increased expenditure due to the pandemic in order to levy these pennies. You can't just desire to hold your tax rate constant and so not to have to experience compression. It's specifically for disaster related expenses. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're considering that as a potential option. And then I think this is our last slide of the day before we just move on to any questions. I'm not sure if we have any in the chat, but these particular bills are ones that we have watched, not necessarily related to each other, but House Bill 1568. This particular bill would expand the margin of error on the property value survey. So many of you had some challenges this year. Your local appraisal districts maybe failed the study this year. And this bill would increase the margin of error for the appraisal district to be in consideration of the state values. And so, you know, locally that may feel like a really good thing. At MoCasey, one other thing we like to remind people is that it's good to have uniformity in the way that properties are assessed and values are determined, because obviously state funding is based upon those things. And so as you have irregularities in the system, you may also have some disequities that occur in terms of state funding. So identical or very, very similar properties in two different areas may be assessed differently. And because of a wider margin of error, one particular district may be funded slightly differently than the other. And so that's just something to consider as we watch this bill and as you consider advocating for it. And then House Bill 3445, this would require school districts and charters to spend excess fund balances. Of course, this is the Huberty fund balance bill we've been talking about. So we're not really sure where this bill is going, if it's moving anywhere. It was put up for vote within House Public Education Committee itself, and it got a split vote, and it's not moving forward as of now. It's pending, waiting for potentially Huberty to gain another vote or two so that it can make it out of committee, but he's got a ticking time clock here. And then you might have heard that he also gave a speech on the House floor during the budget consideration, because many people were thinking he might create an amendment to kind of hang this ornament on the Christmas tree of the House Bill 3 cleanup bill, but he didn't decide to do that. And so because, you know, that may have been his best shot to see this particular bill make its way through the system. So right now it looks like it's stalling. So we'll see what happens moving forward, but feel free to ask any questions that you have about other bills, and we'll try to entertain those. But for now, just wait for the follow-up email with the recording, with the presentation, with the CTE runs, as well as the calculator. Thank you so much for continuing to be in conversation with us this spring, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Did get one question about disaster pennies. Can you go back to that slide? Because I always get 1438 and 14.
Yeah, I know, because the numbers are so close.
Yes, yeah. So, yes, so to answer that question, 1428 is the one that doesn't kick in. It doesn't have the ability to kick in immediately, right? It specifically calls for it to go into effect beginning with the 2022 tax year. So you would, if you're looking to adopt a disaster penny tied to COVID this summer, you could do that if only Senate Bill 1428 passed in its current form. However, you know, Senate Bill 1438 and House Bill 3376 are also moving, and so it's kind of watching a horse race here. With Senate Bill 1438 and its companion House Bill 3376, that would prevent I'll call it a COVID penny, right? A disaster penny tied to COVID from being adopted this summer, right? So that would not be an option for you if that sort of second group of bills there passed.
Oh, and then we have a question about, have you run a calculator for the fast growth allotment that is in House Bill 1525? We will be releasing a full bill workup for that. And if you have particular questions about how your district would be affected by the fast growth allotment changes, yeah, just either sit tight for that or contact us directly, because we have been analyzing that. I think Josh, if you would speak to the cost of the bill and sort of maybe why we started with CTE as overall runs.
Yeah. And actually, I'm sorry, just real quickly, Lyda was asking, what are our options? I don't think I addressed that. I'm sorry about that. Just real quickly to wrap up the disaster penny conversation. If you're, I know Region 1 districts did get, they are more subject to other disasters. So Hurricane Hannah, for example, you could adopt a disaster penny for that. I know a number of districts in the Region 1 area are sort of exploring that. So if you wanted to adopt a disaster penny, there could be another qualifying disaster in calendar 2020 that you could use. And if there's not, and you still wanted to increase your M&O rate, the only really other option is to have an election, right? So to increase your M&O, to add more tier 2 pennies, if you're above, if you have more than 5 golden pennies and you want to add new tier 2 pennies, the only options are disaster pennies or an election, right? And so if you don't have a disaster in 2020, then that means your only option is an election. Okay.
Oh, and just real quick on the fast growth allotment, this one is a little easier to run in some ways. We can create a calculator, but this basically what you want to do is just take your growth over the last 6 years and subtract 250 from that and multiply that by 0.13 times 6160. I know that's all out loud, but it's we can share that math as well for you to run that here in the chat. But yeah, so 0.3 times 6160 times your growth over 250 over the last 6 years. And that's what your allotment would be, because there isn't an upper quartile of growth that you have to be designated as. It's for any district that over the last 6 years has grown over 250 students in enrollment, not in attendance. So you can calculate that pretty quickly and compare that to what you have been receiving or what you're expecting to receive this year. And also that multiplier of 0.3, that's for next year, and then it increases as the years go out. So 0.35 is eventually what it will hit. But I think kind of the math that they were thinking of is we've still got this thing called the formula transition grant that we have to pay for that's pretty expensive. So the first few years of implementation, we've got to make this allotment fall within the current appropriation, which is maybe more around 300 million or a little bit less actually this year. And so once we get to that, the termination of the formula transition grant, there'll be additional funding that may become available that they can use for this purpose. So the weight does potentially go up. It's capped at 320 million though, regardless. I'm not sure if there's any other questions in the chat. So thanks so much guys for coming. And of course, we will continue to keep you updated and send these resources once we've got them all tied up.
Is the 6th year the 15-16 school year? I think that's correct. So
yeah, so basically this the window for 2021 would have been I think 14-15 through 19-20. So it's inclusive of, it's 5 years of change, if that makes sense. So it's your growth in enrollment. So yes, any growth above 250 students. So if you grew by 251 students, then you're funded based upon one additional student's growth. If you grew by 1,000, you're funded on 750 students over that period of time.
Right, yeah, so just to be real clear, you take your enrollment in the 14-15 school year, so fall, right, of the 14-15 school year. Then you take your enrollment in fall of 2021, right, Catherine?
Well, if you're talking about 2021, I may have not said the years correctly, but it's not inclusive of the year in which you're funded. It's based upon the prior 6 years of growth. So
I see. So then I think, let's see here. You gotta love doing math.
I know, math on the fly, like Commissioner Morath likes to talk about. So yeah, so it's 14. So for this current school year, it would be 14-15, your enrollment in fall of 14-15 to your enrollment in 19-20. Subtract those two numbers, back out 250, and then multiply that by 0.3 times 6160 for what it would be at its minimum.
Yeah.
Now it could grow with a larger multiplier, provided that the state doesn't see such explosive growth that the weight has to be prorated down. But that's what you could calculate for this year. Okay, I'm gonna stop recording.